The Detroit Lions are currently 11-1 and have a net point differential of positive 180. So in today's video, I want to talk about the dominance of the Detroit Lions and what their future might look like. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. So as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Detroit Lions. They currently sit at a record of 11-1. They have scored a total of 383 points and only have given up 203. I think a good way to sort of start off the video is just by looking at some general statistics, because holy S word, this team absolutely dominates almost every single statistical category. They currently rank number 1 in points per game, number 2 in yards per game, and number 1 in touchdowns per game. They also rank within the top 10 of basically every offensive statistic. When it comes to rushing the football, they average a rushing play on 50.85% of plays, which is the 4th highest in the NFL, and they average basically 5 yards a carry, which is the 8th best in the NFL, and they rank number 3 in rushing yards per game. Now, if you flip over to the defensive side of things, it's also really good. They rank number 4 in opponents' points per game, number 11 in opponents' yards per game, and number 2 in opponents' touchdowns per game. They also rank within the top 3 of many other statistical numbers, such as opponent 4th down conversion rate, red zone scoring percentage, and opponents' points per play. The only statistic that I could really find that is sort of a negative for the Detroit Lions is their sack percentage, which is 23rd best in the NFL, but that's kind of to be expected because you just lost Aiden Hutchinson for the season. If Hutchinson was there, this defense would probably have a very high sack rate and probably be within the top 15. So yes, this Detroit Lions team is absolutely dominant. They've looked really good in basically every single game. When you look at the kind of a breakdown of their schedule, it was kind of a little bit of a slow start for their season. They had an overtime victory over a healthy LA Rams team. That was obviously an interesting game because it was a playoff rematch, Matthew Stafford going against his old team. Of course, it was going to be a close game. That was a good Rams team at the time. I would say they're better then than they are now. Then you had a bad loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where you kind of dominated them for a big chunk of the game, but you still found a way to lose. It's kind of a weird one. Again, slow start out the books, but then after that, you beat the Arizona Cardinals, you beat the Seattle Seahawks, you beat the Dallas Cowboys, you smothered the Dallas Cowboys. You had a really close game with the Minnesota Vikings, which are one of the better teams in the NFL. You put a pounding on Tennessee, you beat up on Green Bay, you beat the Houston Texans, you absolutely just demolished the Jacksonville Jaguars. You did a good job against the Colts, and most recently, Matt Eberflus gave the Detroit Lions a victory on Thanksgiving. Shout out to Matt Eberflus. That was a good Thanksgiving gift. So currently, as we sit here, they're 11-1. Jared Goff is playing up to a Pro Bowl caliber, arguably maybe even an MVP caliber. I will say I won't give him the MVP nod over Lamar or Josh Allen, though I think he could definitely be in that conversation to get the award, just not like top 3. In terms of how this team actually tries to play football, it's quite honestly pretty simple. It's a whole lot of play action. It's a whole lot of David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, rely on the offensive line, and don't put Jared Goff in a bunch of bad situations. And that's not because Jared Goff is a bad quarterback. It's just simply, why put your quarterback in bad situations if you don't really have to? For example, a team like, I don't know, let's just talk about the Dallas Cowboys, who they smothered. The Dallas Cowboys put so much pressure on Dak Prescott because they didn't have a run game. The offensive line was bad, and the only weapon they had was CeeDee Lamb. Whereas for Jared Goff, he doesn't really have to be put in those situations because they have 2 good running backs, a fantastic offensive line, a great tight end, and a couple really solid receivers, especially Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's a freaking superstar. So quite honestly, it's almost impossible to put him in those bad situations, but the play calling also doesn't, try to put him in those bad situations. So what is a bad situation for Jared Goff? Well, dropping back and throwing the ball 50 times a game. That's not really what you want to do with this team, and this team doesn't have to. Even if they are down, let's say 2 touchdowns by a really good team, they can still effectively run the ball down the field to get back into the game. They haven't really been tested this year in that way, which is maybe a slight concern on my end, but I mean, you're beating teams with the formula. I don't think they're going to change it come playoff time. You run the ball with David Montgomery and those big, chunk plays there, but Jahmyr Gibbs is really the big chunk play getter, and Jahmyr Gibbs is a freaking superstar. And when it comes to passing the ball, again, a lot of play action, some good RPO game, and when Jared Goff is asked to drop back, you don't feel really panicked because Jared Goff is a damn good quarterback. I do think we have to give Jared Goff a bunch of respect. He doesn't really get a lot of respect within the NFL community because I think we all kind of just label him as a system quarterback when I think he's far better than what that even could interpret as. On the year, Jared Goff has 2,982 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. I will say he had 5 interceptions in one game, so if you take away those, he only has 4 interceptions in the remaining 10 games. This Lions team, I will say, is good enough to win even when Goff has a bad win, or has a bad game. So I do understand why people might label him as a system quarterback, but I think that's completely unfair to his level of play because, quite honestly, he's been doing this for quite a number of years at this point. I have a Jared Goff video on my second channel that I think is really awesome, so I think you guys should check it out. But in that video, which should be coming out in the next couple days, I go into some of his statistics and numbers and talk about his career, and it truly is astonishing how good he's actually been statistically speaking. I mean, multiple years with over 4,000 passing yards, close to 30 plus touchdowns, and very good not turning the ball over. I'm not saying Jared Goff is Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, and I don't think Jared Goff is the type of quarterback that can take a terrible team and get them to a Super Bowl. Like, he's not that level of quarterback, which there's only like 3 maybe out there: Josh Allen, Lamar, maybe Joe Burrow, and maybe Patrick Mahomes. Like, those are the only quarterbacks that can do that. But Jared Goff is a damn good top 10 level quarterback that you put him in the right situation will find a way to get that team to where they want to be. He did it with the LA Rams. He's now doing it with the Detroit Lions. Yes, both those teams were talented as hell, but Jared Goff was the one that was, steadying the ship and making everything work. So I got to give my credit to Jared Goff. He is playing like, a fantastic quarterback. He's outplayed multiple quarterbacks that a lot of people might think are better than him. Now, when I kind of look at the future of this Detroit Lions team moving forward, I don't really feel all that worried this year or even after this year. Because when you look at their remaining schedule, they do have a number of really tough and interesting games. But you're 11-1, you're basically a lock to make the playoffs, and barring a total collapse, you're probably going to be the number 1 seed. Next week, you have the Green Bay Packers, which should be a really good game. I will say they beat them by 10 points earlier in the year, but I do expect a closer matchup. I do think Green Bay is a true playoff contender, maybe even Super Bowl contender this year. Then after that game, you got the Buffalo Bills. That is going to be an awesome matchup, potentially a Super Bowl matchup. But then after those 2 games, you have the Chicago Bears, who we'll see what that team looks like after Matt Eberflus. They could be way better or way worse. Then you got the San Francisco 49ers, who don't look like they're going to make the playoffs, which is a crazy statement to say. And barring some injuries, maybe they could be having Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey going out there. That won't be an easy game, but we'll have to wait and see. We kind of just don't know what that team's going to look like at that point in time. And then to end the season off, you have the Minnesota Vikings. Now, depending on how good they do over these next couple games, they could honestly just rest their starters and not even have to worry about that game. But I do think this Lions team is a little bit of a differently built team. They're probably more than likely going to play that game. So if they do, I would probably favor Detroit again. If we look at the current playoff rankings and kind of look at who their potential matchups could be, I don't really fear any of the teams in the NFC, to be honest with you. The only teams in the NFC that I think truly would give Detroit a run for their money are the Philadelphia Eagles, the Green Bay Packers, and maybe the Minnesota Vikings. Because as it sits here today, I don't really fear any of the teams in the NFC West, whether it's Seattle, LA, Arizona, or San Francisco. I just think those teams have a lot of flaws going for them that I think Detroit could easily beat them. Then I look at the NFC South. I do think Atlanta will win that division. If it is Tampa Bay, it's maybe a bit more competitive, but again, I just don't fear that the Detroit Lions would lose to those teams. However, with Minnesota and with Green Bay, those are 2 very well coached teams with 2 very good offenses and some really good defensive players. They have the talent to match up with a team like Detroit. I still think Detroit would be favored, but those teams could be interesting matchups for the Lions. Obviously, they see each other twice a year, so both the teams kind of know what each team wants to do, so that could play in favor of Detroit or play against Detroit. But really, the Eagles are the one team that kind of does give me a little bit of pushback on saying that the Lions are going to cruise through the NFC playoffs. Because the Eagles have a nice formula of running the football. If you want to beat the Eagles, though, I kind of think you got to put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hand and make him throw a bunch of passes and, hopefully for the opposing team, throw some turnovers. But with that said, it's also interesting because Jalen Hurts is a dang good quarterback who's got some awesome receivers. So I don't know. I think Detroit would be favored, but that would be a really interesting matchup. And right now in the AFC side of things, I mean, Kansas City is obviously Kansas City. They've already clinched a playoff spot, but they have not played well at all this year. There have been multiple times where they should have lost or could have lost, but they didn't lose. I kind of think Detroit would beat Kansas City right now, but again, you can never, doubt Kansas City in the playoffs. Buffalo's an interesting one. I think Detroit would be favored, but it is interesting. But outside of those 2 teams, maybe the Ravens could make for a fun matchup, but I don't really fear any team in the AFC. So quite frankly, I do think Detroit would be favored in basically every single game, maybe outside of the Kansas City Chiefs, just because they have Patrick Mahomes and are getting a little bit more healthy. Now, if we look even beyond this year, which I don't think many Lions fans are trying to do right now, nor should they, because they're probably going to win multiple playoff games and maybe even win a Super Bowl. But if we look beyond it, they still have a lot of things going for them. In terms of salary cap, they have over $26 million to work with, which isn't a ton of money, but given the fact this team has so many superstars, this team having positive salary cap is actually really impressive. I will say they're going to have to find a way to pay certain players on this team, such as Jameer Gibbs in a couple years. So you do have to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But if you do want to be aggressive to try and pursue an extra corner or get an extra pass rusher, you could definitely do so. Because when you look at the free agency class for this Detroit Lions team, it isn't that important to bring back a lot of these players. I will say you're probably going to want to bring back Carlton Davis because he's been really good in the secondary. Kevin Zeitler is also out there. Maybe you bring him back on a one-year deal again. Marcus Davenport, maybe you let him go, maybe you don't. I don't know. I don't think you really care too much about that, especially if you can find a significant upgrade over him. And you got guys like Derek Barnes, Craig Reynolds, a couple of those guys. I don't feel like there's a bunch of names on here that I'm seriously worried about losing. Again, maybe Carlton Davis and Kevin Zeitler, if you can get those guys back on nice deals, I would definitely do so. And if you really want to, you could also do a couple things like restructuring some contracts. If you restructure Jared Goff, you get $5 billion. If you restructure Frank Ragnow, you get $4.5 million. If you restructure multiple other deals, you get a couple extra thousands and millions of dollars to go out there and sign some, budget guys out there. So this Lions team is in a really good situation. Again, I don't expect them to be crazy in free agency because they have to pay their guys. Like, again, Amon-Ra St. Brown is getting a massive contract or has a massive contract, so you got to pay those guys. But, again, this is a really solid team that's really built for the future. I have really no concerns about them. I think they're the best team in the NFL. I think they should likely cruise through the playoffs. Jared Goff is a fantastic quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a fantastic wide receiver. Jameer Gibbs, David Montgomery make one of the best running back duos, maybe in recent memory, at least in my opinion. Offensive line is solid. Penei Sewell is one of the best tackles in the NFL. And defensively speaking, the upgrades and the improvements they've made on that side of the field has been really drastic. Many years ago, the Lions defense was kind of the thing that kind of held them back, but that hasn't been the case this year. Yes, they don't have a great pass rusher now that Aiden Hutchinson is gone, but they still find ways. They got guys who can generate pressure. They can blitz a little bit. The secondary is solid. Do I think the Lions defense is the best in the NFL? No, but it's probably top 5, maybe top 7 level good. And when you have a top 10 level defense with in my opinion, the best offense in the league, yeah, you're going to do a lot of magical things. I want to give a massive shout out to all Lions fans. You guys have been dealing with absolute hell for the last, 20 plus years. I mean, it's been misery. I feel bad for Stafford because the second that he leaves, the team actually gets good. Shout out to the coaching staff. Shout out to Ben Johnson. Come to one of my favorite teams. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.